Hello there, my name is Joel Madartikuri, and today I'm going to see how taxation can come in accordance with the fiscal policy. So what I hope to achieve, what I want to try to do with my research projects is look at various parts of our current fiscal policy and see how we can implement higher taxation, specifically to the top percentage of our population in order to provide a better quality of life for the general population in a whole. And I'll also look into one of the benefits, which would come in terms of free college, that could potentially be made out due to higher taxation. So the history and the data behind taxation. So the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, they did an investigation on how higher taxation on a personal income level affected uh, certain states which implemented them and how it caused them to grow or diminish in value over time. And this affected, this measured the actions taken by many different states, and it also compared and correlated them. So how can higher taxation be used? So if higher taxation is made possible, then there's more money to be invested into the people as a whole. There's more money to be invested into the community, and there's also more money to be used in new innovative ideas, which can produce a better quality of life. So we see that higher tax income increase can generate more investments for economic and social benefits. Raising personal tax actually minimizes the effects of one of the major problems when it comes to our budget, which are budget cuts. When budget cuts occur, a lot of the funding for current or future projects are lost. But if with increasing personal income tax, we're able to minimize that and bring in some of the funding that we need, at least at a state level, to continue or progress to new or better projects. But higher taxation, sorry, my camera's in the way. Is it the beginning? Isn't great in the beginning, right? If you think about higher taxation, you would assume that in the very beginning, less money is being made by the individual, which would cause the overall lack or need for taxation. That's one of the main reasons why higher taxation is not as viable right now. However, when we look at the data by the Center of Policies, we see that 7 out of 8 states who enacted a millionaire's tax saw a proportional or higher growth in the first 5 years in comparison to their neighbors. The only state that did not make it was the state of Connecticut. And the reason behind why they weren't higher or comparable to their neighbors were beyond the state tax uh, conundrum. It was affected by outside forces. We can also see that 5 out of 8 states actually added more jobs than their neighbors, or at least as quickly as their neighbors. And we see that this causes like no immediate damage when there is a higher taxation to to an individual's personal income. In fact, we can see that 100,000 can be taxed without any sort of problems. Anybody in the higher than $100,000 in annual income being taxed does not actually incur any loss on the long run. So how are current policies affecting the population? So the current policies, especially the ones that were made by Trump in 2017, which had tax cuts, saw that low-income Americans face higher payroll taxes than rich Americans. And this is at a rate of about 14.1% for the lower income Americans, while the higher income Americans are only taxed about 1.9% of their total income, which is extremely disproportional to what people make. And this disproportion actually continues even more when we look at how capital gains and qualified dividends, both for the forms of capital income, are lower and preferential rates, overwhelmingly in favor of the rich. We see that the richest 0.5% receive about 70.2% of all long-term capital. Even pass-through business income also goes directly to the rich, and most of this money never can even be seen by the lower class. And this goes on to the SALT deduction, which is also extremely regressive. SALT, which stands for the state and local tax, benefits the rich about 75.1%, with only about 1% of these making anyone, only about 1% of the benefits actually going to anyone making below $30,000 a year. So much of the lower income never see the SALT deductions either. And this goes even more into the mortgage interest deduction, which is also skewed to the rich. We see that the average mortgage deductible is about $13,061 for about the seven-figure range, but then it goes down to only about $2,886 for six, $274 for five, and $33 for four-figure salaries. So the mortgage deductible is proportionately lower the more the less that someone is making. Next, we have the progressive estate and gift taxes, and this is exactly where the Trump 2017 laws come into effect, where we see that the estate and gift taxes used to account for a quite large portion of our GDP. Right now, it only accounts for about 0.1% of our GDP, and much of that revenue is being much of the loss in the revenue has to be combated by other measures, which include a lower um, budget for other programs such as like healthcare, education, and so on and so forth. So how has taxation been reformed recently? When we look at the recent reformations, we're looking at Joe Biden. He proposed a billionaire minimum tax, which required about 20% of all income taxes for everybody, 20% of income tax on everyone. And this was going to be a revolutionary project, which would introduce higher taxation, which would hopefully introduce better budgeting and more room for improvement in policies. However, immediately after this proposal, there was also the Tax Inflation Reduction Act, which basically counteracted everything that was said on the billionaire minimum income tax, because all of the taxation that was imposed upon everyone, not just even the top 1% in this case, has been taken back in the Tax Inflation Reduction Act. So most of the recent tax reforms have more been a formality to really hide the fact that nothing has really changed. In fact, it's remained steadily similar or worse. However, there has been a small uh, caveat in terms of higher funds for the IRS. This can allow for people to be caught for tax evasion or any kind of tax fraud that might take place with the higher funding to the IRS. But other than that, there hasn't been anything too radical in terms of recent taxation reform. So, how does people in America generally view taxation? So we see that the people that should do that want taxation is in green, and that don't want it is in blue here. And we see that it starts in the 1940s during the Great Depression, where the recessions and the lack in income were very much prevalent. But as we go over the line around the year 2000, that's when people really started going for the other end of the spectrum and wanting taxation for the general public as a whole. And this is information provided by the Gallup News magazine. And we see that more often than not, people nowadays want higher taxation for better benefits and so on and so forth. We can also see how political ideologies have caused this as well. As you would expect, Republicans generally are against taxation, against big taxation, as well as not really leaning towards huge higher income taxes. However, Democrats on the other hand, are very much in tune with it, and they stay consistent in terms of being for taxation of the top 1%, as well as some taxation on the middle of the pack. So one of the benefits of increasing taxation could be combating one of the main flaws of the American government in comparison to many of the European governing bodies. This is, of course, we're talking about free education. So with the extra revenue from taxes, as we mentioned before, is there some like free education that can provide for America? So we see the pros of free education is there's going to be a reduce in student debt. We see that the current sorry, I'm sorry. We see that the current average is about 37,000 to $37,700 in student debt, and you'd be a lucky person if you come out of college with only 10K in debt. With personal income tax increases, we can see in providing free college, we can see how this can reduce the burden on students past their college education, past their graduation, not having to pay the student debt, and not having to just take out a huge chunk of their income after graduating, just to pay off for what little education they just got. We can also see that we will have an increased college graduation rate. This is because about 50% of dropouts uh, can't actually afford college, and that's the reason behind why they drop out. And we see that 79% have to discontinue their college education somewhere in between their 4 years in order to go work to pay for what they have done or pay for what they need to learn. So with free education, we can see how college graduates will be able to just graduate at a higher rate, and people would not have to drop out just because they can't afford to pay for it. And finally, and this is a very good one, we're talking about more freedom in the choice of majors. Many people, if you choose a major, you have to like go buy it. If you want to change the major, it's way too expensive and it's way too much of a hassle for a person to go from one major to another, especially if they've completed at least 1 year as a junior or as a senior. With free education, people have the ability to check out multiple majors, many classes as they would like, not having to worry about price, which could just be an overall great thing for quality of life. But there are also downsides to free education. When it comes to free education, college will lose its seriousness. People are not going to take education as serious as it is. Of course, this is a hypothetical. Uh, as seeing as you won't need to pay for it, there isn't much of an incentive to really put effort into it, unless there is a still a college hierarchical system, where the higher grades you get depend is correlated to what colleges will accept you. Another factor would be the lack of quality in education. If everybody's going to college, we can see how people less inclined to go to college would lower the overall quality of education for that particular college or in college in general. So if more people go, there's a more than likely chance that community colleges would lack their quality even more, which would mean that there's just not as much of an incentive to get college education. There's also more attendance in college. This can be a pro in terms of it allows for everyone to go to college. I mean, if you don't have to pay for it, there's a huge incentive for people in the lower social cracks to go to college, and that's great. However, with more attendance in college and more graduation rates and more degrees, the value of a degree diminishes quite rapidly. If everybody has a college degree, then it just becomes more like a high school diploma, and the quality of the education comes back to this particular instance where it just doesn't make sense to have everybody go to college. So in conclusion, is it worth it to increase taxation? We have to take into consideration that American model is based upon one's ability to keep the money that they make, and that is respectable. However, I believe the European models of free education, which was one of the examples I provided, alongside free healthcare and many other policies, can be implemented into the American system, just with a little bit more taxation. So I would suggest that it is a worth investment and people will generally benefit from it. Thank you.